We live in an incredible age of information. More and more, we're discovering that we've been lied to and misled about much of our human history. Corey Hughes is providing profound revelations about World War I, World War II, the JFK assassination, Martin Luther King's assassination, and much, much more on his new Substack, Bloody History. Subscribe now for as little as $5 monthly. Just click that link right in the description to get started now and learn about our true history. Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Walter Bosley. First, just a couple of announcements. If you would like to help with our film fundraiser, we have links in the description. Anything is greatly appreciated. Other ways to help support Forbidden Knowledge News, you can watch the Forbidden documentary, Occult Louisiana, on Tubi, Roku channel, and many other streaming platforms. You can get a Rockfin premium membership at rockfin.com/FKN+, and be sure to download our audio episodes through Spreaker. Today I want to welcome back to the show Walter Bosley. He is an investigator of historical occult mysteries, author of pulp fiction novels, and a screenwriter who has appeared on History Channel's Ancient Aliens. After 19 years in national security, he is a licensed private investigator in California, where he also runs his small press publishing company, Lost Continent Library. He spends his time writing fiction and nonfiction, as well as investigating strange mysteries in between PI assignments. Walter, welcome back. How you doing?
Pretty good. Glad to be back here. It's always good to talk with you.
Yes, it's great to have you back. We finally made it happen again, and I'm looking forward to it as well. Today, I wanted to get your thoughts and insights into the extremely strange nature of our current reality and how those with eyes to see are aware of some of the massive synchronicities and predictive programming that has come out of books, literature, and Hollywood throughout our modern history. And it seems like this year especially, there are some eyebrow-raising events occurring in the political space that can seem straight out of a pulp fiction novel. And on top of that, there's a new level of political propaganda brought to us by AI art and algorithms. It gets difficult to even imagine what our future can hold, even just a few years from now. But I have my popcorn and guns ready, and we'll see how it goes, I guess. But before we get into this, remind the audience just a little bit about yourself. It's been a while, and your work.
Well, I spent 20 years in the U.S. national security community between multiple agencies. And most of that time was in counterespionage and counterintelligence. And about a third of that time was dedicated counterterrorism. I would like to clarify one thing, because there's this kind of ignorant definition going around out there that's popular. And there's some guys out there that are characterizing anybody in counterintelligence as some type of evil, nefarious Gestapo person whose job it was to lie.
I'm going to be in the CIA just from talking to you, Walter, so you know. I said I'm going to be in the CIA just from talking to you. I'm going to be a shill or whatever, you know.
Yeah, and here's the thing. That counterintelligence is countering the intelligence agencies of hostile nations. that's what counterintelligence means. It's if you're into disinformation duties, disinformation is what they mean, but they're besmirching the good name of counterintelligence. Okay, and us counterintelligence guys who've actually done the job and lived in that world don't appreciate when civilians get it so wildly wrong just because it's the popular rant. So I was in counterintelligence, and when you hear those guys say, all them counterintelligence guys, their job is to lie, they know this little bit, and they think they know a lot more. So anyway, I felt the need to clarify that because, yeah, I'm very proud of my time in counterintelligence, counterespionage. I did counterespionage operations as well. And again, against the agents and operations of foreign intelligence services and hostile nations. I didn't do my stuff against any Americans. So, you know, there's a lot of misperceptions out there and this will play into our discussion today because it's one of the many misperceptions that stirs people up in the wrong direction. People need to be stirred up. Don't get me wrong, but they're being aimed in the wrong direction. So I did that for 20 years. Saw a big chunk of the world when I was in counterterrorism. And towards the end of that, I started my own publishing company. And I've been doing that now almost 22 years, publishing company of fiction and nonfiction. And I've really enjoyed being a publisher. My degree was in journalism. So, you know, it's kind of being a man of letters is part of my formal education and part of my life. So that's pretty much the quick version of me.
Right on. That was a perfect introduction. Now, speaking of misinformation and the state of insanity that we're in right now, conspiracy culture has become dangerous waters at times. Now, I do this for a living. This talk show covers conspiracies, the occult, paranormal, everything out of the normal space of everyday thoughts. Things have gotten so strange in our reality, it's hard to decipher some of the things that you interact with through social media because social media is what we are primarily using to communicate, to convey our ideas, our theories, and really share information as a whole right now. So it's been interesting to see what's happened since the events of 2020 have played out with censorship, with cancel culture. And now it seems like it's just flooded with misinformation, bad information. I'd love to get your thoughts and insights into how everything has unfolded over the past few years.
That's a big question. I think I'm on board with you know, all of us who saw an agenda with what's been going on from the beginning. And when I say from the beginning, I mean, you know, the real beginning of the agenda, of course, was the COVID issue, right? The pushing of that on us, the quarantines, and then, of course, the monkey business with the election later that year. And, you know, the whole objective of the current administration from day one was to just simply reverse what the previous guy did, you know, and started that on day one. And increasingly putting the screws to the economy. Basically, they want to control the masses. They want greater control over the masses, the people perpetrating this. And, you know, one way that you go after a society like here in the U.S. Is you divide us, you keep us very unhappy, you keep us down, and one of the best ways to do that is to break all of us financially. Okay, Americans, we may disagree on a lot of other things, but we usually agree that none of us like being broke. Not really. And the heart of any kind of resistance is a middle class. Okay, it's been that way in other societies. It's been that way in our history. For tyrants to rule, they have to destroy. Okay, they have to defang and destroy, and if they can, eliminate the middle class. Okay, because it's from the middle classes that people rise into the upper class and can potentially become as wealthy and powerful as the perpetrators. And they don't want that. There's people out there that, you know, and I don't think they're crazy. They'll point out that, and again, the vaccine is one of the signs of this, one of the overt signs of this. They want a lot of us dead. Okay. But before that, they want to drive us into the ground. So that's why all the division, that's why the breaking of us financially, that's why ruining entrepreneurship on the small, mid-level. Corporatism is all they want. And so all of this stuff there, when you're talking about the predictive programming, okay, what that's serving is the mental confusion. That's serving the division and the chaos. Okay, it's the kind of thing that we're going to notice. I mean, think about it. They want us to notice that. Now, you can talk about revelation of method, right? When someone's doing some type of magical working or such, you know, there's the revelation of method, or just revelation that, yeah, we're going to do this thing, and then, you know, it happens. These are all tactics to serve the chaos and the division and to drive us nuts, right? They want us so paranoid, okay, that really what the goal is to have us question even the truth, question even the real things. This is why you get flat earthers being so adamant that, right? This is why you get Apollo 11 moon landing deniers, okay? Because now the thing is, if you say, I don't think that happened, now when somebody says, well, it did happen, and here's the evidence proving it, now what these folks do is just say, well, I don't accept that, therefore I keep my position. So, you know, this is where we're at, and they want it to get worse. Here's the thing. It's divide and conquer, okay? They start us out on the level where they don't want us to believe in history anymore. They want to wipe that out. They don't want us to believe anything we see, and they don't want us to believe each other, okay? And with a lot of people, the perpetrators of this, are achieving that. You know, anyway, that was a big question, and that was great. Some of that.
I have been checked out of being invested in politics at all, on any level. To me, I see it as theater. Called me a super conspiracy theorist. I'm sure that there's levels of it. I'm sure that even some of the players in these positions believe that they are doing this for certain reasons, but above all, there are higher powers pulling the strings. I've come to see that, and I have lost faith in the system, and I see that both sides have become so extreme that even if you're looking at things objectively in the middle, you have become the enemy these days because you're not a right-wing or a left-wing extremist.
Yes, and absolutely, and that's one of my things I have issue with what's going on in our society. Now, here's how I put it. I personally am a right-of-center guy. Definitely, okay? Definitely. I've considered myself conservative with a small c. Now, I have a distaste for the establishment Republican Party. Okay? I do not trust nor like neocons. Okay? because there's just a little too much of the fascist thread running through their philosophy. Now, a lot of people in our community for a long time, they would agree with that. But now we've got a new extreme, on the right side, which in my opinion is proving already to me, and they're going to prove it more to others, that they're as bad as extremists on the left. But if you say anything critical about them to your fellow people right of center, you get immediately labeled, well, you're a hater. You hate this particular kind of people. And my thing is, no, I just see, as you said, Americans are being split and divided, and they're trying to push us to the extremes as quickly and as far as possible. Okay, because they know there's irrationality there. They know that anybody who's not to the extreme left or the extreme right is a little more open to working together and not being susceptible to the crap that they want to control us with. Okay. So what they've managed to do with the extremists on the right, in my opinion, is they've settled on something that is so steeped in the conditioning of many Americans that when you speak critically of it, it gets misunderstood. See, and that right there is why we have the extremes. There's people on the left. There's people, I have friends that are left of center, family that's left of center, and they're saying the same thing about their side. And we all say, what happened to the days when you're not old enough. I'm old enough to remember when most of your friends, you didn't know how they voted because it wasn't something that was, waved around like a fiery flag in front of everybody's face 24/7. We worked together. We got along better. But they don't want that. They don't want that. They want these extremes, and they want the extremists on left and right to be calling the shots for each side. In other words, you go in lockstep with us here on the far right, or you're not conservative, or you're not with us, you're one of them. And we know the radicals on the left do the same crazy thing. So, this is part of what's been going on and what's going on right now.
Well, I want to go back to the predictive programming and synchromistic aspects of what we see in a daily basis through Hollywood, literature, and just in our own lives. I in no way claim to understand how synchronicities work, but I've experienced it enough to recognize when it happens and know that there's something to this. I see it in my own life on a small scale, but I also see it in a macro sense with everything unfolding. And you look back at events throughout history and you can see how they're connected in different ways. And earlier you mentioned how a lot of it, yes, is programmed into it intentionally, but I'm wondering if there's this other mystical force, some kind of creative force that flows through writers, authors, producers, that comes through that really creates this synchromistic reality that we live in, and it's not all top-down pyramid Illuminati planned and put in there,
Right. Yeah, thank you. That's another thing. I get so weary of the people that it's all a conspiracy.
Yeah.
It's all the Illuminati. No, it's not all. Okay. They love that you believe that. Yeah. And I don't get through discussions like this without having to bring up the Dunning-Kruger problem, particularly in the United States. Oh my God. We have so many people that think they know. And remember, the Dunning-Kruger thing involves, it's a syndrome where, you think you know something, you know nothing, or you don't know what it is you think you know. And the more you think you're right, the less you're right, and oh my God, right now, American society is full of those idiots. But here's the thing. On synchronicity, we know that Jung defined it as a meaningful coincidence, and that's really one of the best definitions that it is the best definition for a single synchronicity. When I first started encountering them and realizing I was encountering them, because they're all around us, folks, you're encountering them all the time, whether you realize it or not. But when I started realizing it and seeing them, at first you think, oh my God, something's communicating this to me. And it can be something that is alerting you to them and communicating them to you. But then as I experienced them more and got deeper and deeper, I began to see that, wait a minute, synchronicities are kind of the threads or are a thread in the fabric of reality. Okay. They are at the same time, synchronicities can be something that is consciously placed by a sentient being, be it human or otherwise, or a synchronicity can be something that is organic in the sense that it's the nature of how material reality manifests and keeps itself going. Let me give you an example. The Abraham Lincoln JFK, resonance, right? And you've heard this for decades, that the synchronicities, the coincidences, they used to call them, synchronicities between Lincoln's assassination and John F. Kennedy's assassination, right? Now, this can be looked at as both ways that I was describing. Number one, you can look at it as something that, let's say, in a period of years, just for simplicity's sake, for discussion, let's say a century, 100 years. Well, in each century, there are certain things that are the iconic things, okay? The what's the word for archetypal things that have to happen to keep reality moving forward. And in the 19th century, okay, Abraham Lincoln was in that role of what was programmed by nature to happen. The leader who gets assassinated, blah, 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 blah. And then in the 20th century, it falls to JFK that he happens to fill that slot. In other words, it was going to happen again, as it did in the 19th, it was going to happen again in some way. Because remember, synchronicities rhyme. They don't necessarily have to match to be identical. And so it was just maybe the bad luck of these men who, their fates led them to be in that position for that thing that had to happen. The other possibility is that it was a conscious act of black magic, for lack of a better term, on such a deep and trans-temporal, cross-time, cosmic level, but perpetrated, okay, in such a way. In other words, the Lincoln assassination perpetrated in such a way, down to certain details, that what they did was they caused a sympathetic magic ripple in the time stream, time-space continuum, so that they dropped the pebble of the magical act of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln into the time-space continuum, okay? And the rings of waves, ripples went out, okay? And that next one to match it was the JFK assassination, 98 years later. Now, it could be in this century, in the 2060s, we have another president assassinated. And it will have all sorts of little resonant details with the JFK and Lincoln assassinations, and it'll freak people out and they'll go, oh, what's going on? And, that was, part of the intention. So there's an example of two synchronicitous events, two events filled with synchronicities that connect them, okay, that could have either been induced consciously as an act of some type of magic, for lack of a better term, or could have just been the design of the 100-year loops that we're on, like a 100-year loop. And so when the next 100 years start, you see similar things happening over and over.
Yeah. Some of the predictive programming that we've seen has been so on the nose, it makes me scratch my head, raise an eyebrow a little bit about where the information comes from. And this brings us to, where does this, I'd call them parasitic ruling class, get their ideologies from, get the information from? And I know you've written lots about and discussed the possibilities of time travel and scrawling, and how possibly some of these very powerful black magic practitioners, for lack of a better term, are able to grasp information from somewhere else.
I think that somebody is able to look across the space-time continuum. Now, if that's true, if I and many others are right about this, then that could be evidence for the multiverse theory. You know, in other words, they may not be looking back in time in this exact dimension that we're living this particular timeline in, but maybe they're able to see cross-dimensionally, right? And they're looking in the past of an adjacent dimension that is all virtually identical to this one, but maybe with certain, at least one significant difference, right? Because the popular understanding of these multiple dimensions is that you change something and you're breaking off, or you've jumped a different track, and there's going to be something different. I think that this idea that someone can do this, and maybe it's having been done for the last now 150 years, let's say, people talk about the extraterrestrial existence and UFOs and the UFO file being ultra secret. I think this is one of the deepest secrets. However it's done, however it worked, I do think somebody has the capability to be looking across time and space, either with a material technology like machinery, a device, whatever, or some type of organic technology like remote viewing. But I don't know the secret as to exactly how. I only, I think there's hints out there, and I explore those hints. And but I do suspect, I have no problem with the discussion that somebody can do it and it's being done, and could definitely explain predictive programming. Although I do want to say this: when you think you see an example of predictive programming, the first thing I want you to do is measure the time between when that programming was made public and when the perceived predicted event happens. Okay? The longer that time, the greater the possibility that the perpetrators of the event got the idea from the programming. In other words, this was not predicted programming in every case. This was just something some writer came up with, either for a laugh or to shock or whatever. And a bad guy somewhere between when that show or movie was out there publicly and the matching event happening, the bad guys in the meantime saw that, and it gave them the idea, right? Now, if there's a short period of time and the matches are just too extraordinary, that's the predictive programming concern that we're talking about. But you have to ask yourself how much time is between that. Like, my understanding is with the Lone Gunman episode where the plane hit the World Trade Center, right? I think that was the same year. That was in 2001 that episode aired.
Yeah,
If
I
I'm
think you're
not
right.
mistaken. Now, yeah, that might be okay. A couple of things here. Okay. Number one, that might be superficially, you'd look at it and you go, well, that's too short of a time for a bad guy to get the idea and then pull off that thing. You know, if it was only, even if it was just a couple of months or whatever, a few months, but definitely if it was only weeks or days or whatever. But then again, the idea of planes being used as weapons in terrorist act was an idea that had been out there, that counterterrorism professionals had learned that bad guys had thought of that years ago. So who knows, writers on these shows, particularly something, this was a spinoff of the X-Files, they cultivate relationships, they cultivate friends, like from the world I was in, and people talk and they say things. And how it could have happened, okay, was some writer in the X-Files happened to know a guy like I used to be, and it was talking with him, and that guy might have said, yeah, there's one terrorist group that they've got a plan to fly airplanes into buildings or major buildings like this, that, or the other, or the World Trade Center, New York, or whatever. And remember, they already tried to bomb it once in the early 90s. Well, then that writer goes, hey, let's have this in the scene there, And then, of course, subsequently it happens. Well, of course it happened because their source in this hypothesis told them this was already planned by the bad guys. So it was just the timing makes it look, weird. Okay. Now, if you want to be honest with yourself as an investigator or somebody trying to ingest all this data we got thrown at us, you have to eliminate the mundane before you can seriously consider and settle on the extraordinary. Okay. You'll be glad you did, because here's the thing. If people get in the practice of stepping back, taking a breath, looking at things objectively, considering the more mundane possibilities, when you can eliminate all those and you come to the extraordinary, you are more confident in your conclusion that it was something extraordinary because you did your work. You did your due diligence. When you jump right to everything's the extraordinary, well, you look like an idiot, whether you think so or not. You end up looking like an idiot. But, that's the consideration for the predictive programming thing. Now, on the side of it being what we suspect it is, yeah, that's really, that's something to be concerned about because, my gosh, to demonstrate some horrific thing that you're going to do with details, like in the Matrix, the 9/11 date on his passport stuff. And to have the arrogance and confidence to, we're going to pull this off. We're going to do this. We're actually going to do this. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Right. Well, you were talking about the possible methods for this time travel ability or dimensional hopping, and you mentioned remote viewing. And to me, this seems like a very probable way to achieve this type of travel. I've spoken with many remote viewers and different guests. Some have told stories about people who have been able to achieve a fully immersed state in these different timelines or these different dimensions for a significant period of time and come back with different information. I've even heard of people that slip into a different timeline and stay there. What do you think about that? Do you think this is at all possible and that time travel could most easily be achieved through consciousness abilities?
Well, talking about organic things, I just wrote about what you said in this new book that I came out with, the Time Travel Guidebook. I got into that. I explored it. I do think remote viewing I think it's valid, first of all. There's folks out there that think it's complete and utter nonsense. And, you know, they don't buy into it, and they, you know, very loudly tell others not to give it any consideration. My personal experience with it has convinced me that there is something to it. I acknowledge that there's a bunch of tomfoolery out there, people claiming to be remote viewers, and there is nonsense and foolishness with anything. You know, there's idiots in UFOs, there's idiots in Bigfoot, there's idiots in anything you want to, you know, point out. You're going to find them, right? That's just the way it is. But I found remote viewing to be a valid thing. And as far as time travel is concerned, I write in this book, this time travel guidebook, that I think I talk about two writers, Jack Finney and Richard Matheson. They're the authors of two great time travel novels. Finney wrote Time and Again. Matheson, of course, wrote a novel titled Bid Time Return, which was changed because of the movie Somewhere in Time. Most people have heard of Somewhere in Time. And here's the interesting thing. Finney's book has a character who's an illustrator. He's an advertising illustrator. And an Army officer, intelligence officer, comes to him and says, we have this secret program, very classified. I want to introduce you to it. And basically, it's about using the mind to time travel, okay, to travel through time to a targeted place in time. And they have their own they got a warehouse, and they've got the warehouse, they built in little apartments in there. And each apartment, the time traveler sequesters him or herself in there. They wear the clothes of their target period. They're surrounded by objects in the environment of their target period, and they use the mind to hypnotize themselves or whatever, and then literally transport their bodies to the targeted time in the past. And the main character, the illustrator, he's very successful at it. And of course, the novel's about his trip back to the 1880s, I think, in New York. But when, you know, I had read this years ago, but when I learned about the remote viewing program, I thought, well, wow, that's, you know, you have a viewer in a little cubicle, right? It's sequestered from any outside noises or distractions. And they focus and they use their mind to see, right, across distances. And one of the things they claim they discovered was they could see across time as well. So I looked into this, and, you know, when I first looked into this, I found out, wait a minute, the remote viewing program, we're told, didn't start until 1972, I think 72 or 3. But boy, does what they do sound very much like this Jack Finney novel. Okay, so I wondered, well, shoot, did they get the idea from Finney? Or were they actually doing this before we're told that the Army remote viewing program began? In other words, were they doing this, say, in the late 60s, and Finney, the author, found out about it and did a fictionalized account? And then we have Matheson 5 years later, which just 2 or 3 years after the remote viewing program, we are told, began. He has a time travel story where a guy does the same thing. He puts on a suit of 1910 in the movie. In the book, it's 1896. And he is in a hotel that existed back then, and he convinces himself that he's back in that time, and it works. He's able to use the power of his mind. You know, the focusing kind of latches him onto that time, and he's able to, with the power of his mind, pull his body into the past as well, so to speak. So they are very similar. They came out within 5 years of each other. These are two guys who knew each other. Okay, Matheson and Finney were two of the great sci-fi writers and fantasy writers of their day, their generation. So certainly they, you know, would influence each other. But I dug a little deeper. I found out that Matheson had been in the Army during World War II, and that Finney, though he hadn't been on active duty in the military, he was working, we're told vaguely because he's an illustrator. He was working on the war posters that had to do with keeping your mouth shut, like loose lips sink ships, that kind of.
Yeah.
And these were the kinds of things that you know, they even had them in my day back in the 80s, you know, these don't talk kind of posters, you know. We had them as a novelty, but they were meant to be taken seriously. And he was doing that. So what did that indicate to someone like me? Now, to someone who doesn't have my background, you would say, so what? He did posters. So what? A lot of guys were in the Army. Okay, you can think that. Go right ahead, Mr. Dunning-Kruger. A guy like me, knowing a little bit more about that world, I go, oh, Finney was involved with that effort. What else was he involved in with military intelligence? Okay. Matheson, he was in the Army. What did he really do in the Army? Okay. So did they still have contacts with the military? If they had been in military intelligence, did they learn? Or did Finney learn about this remote viewing stuff and he told Matheson about it, or did Matheson learn about it from his own contact? I just find it really interesting that these two guys write these particular type of time stories where it's the power of the mind in first looking and thinking across time and space. I found it real interesting. And when you put it all together, you know, you begin to see an hypothesis emerge that, okay, maybe what we're seeing in these works of fiction is a clue and a hint as to what could actually be done with this remote viewing stuff. So, you know, that's, and again, I flashed the book for those who can see my time travel guidebook. I go into the, you know, the details on that.
There's so many questions surrounding this.
So yeah, I
go ahead.
I'm just saying, yes, I do think remote viewing allows one to look across time and space.
Yeah, and as I was saying, there's so many questions surrounding this. Where my mind goes is, if we are accessing different dimensions or realities that are unfolding simultaneously, are we, in a sense, taking over someone else's consciousness or taking over someone else's body in a different dimension? Are we pushing out that consciousness, or are we creating a brand new reality just with the power of our mind? I don't know, my weird mind goes there.
Could be all of it, but I would suggest another possibility, that if your consciousness in this timeline, you know, jumps to a different timeline, dimension, let's say it's another dimension, what you might be occupying is your body in that other dimension. I think that's more likely. Or, as Lovecraft wrote back in 1937, before he died, you know, and he got the idea from a movie titled Berkeley Square, 1934. Look it up. He was obsessed with that film. What you could be doing is jumping into the body of an ancestor. You know,
what I'm wondering is, does it negate the consciousness of that, say, ancestor that is having that human experience at that time? If our consciousness that has all of our memories from this particular timeline jumps into that one, does it merge? Or I wonder if it just pushes that out. That's a very strange but interesting question.
It could merge, but for example, in the story in Berkeley Square, the ancestor, his consciousness goes forward in time to the body of the man who's jumped into his body from the future. So they switch. Yeah, that's one option. Another option is that they're both occupying that body at the same time, and technically, you could call that some type of possession, and that could cause problems. Potentially, like maybe schizophrenia, you know, disassociation, that kind of thing. If it's done wrong, or if the psyche of the person can't handle it, or for whatever reason, You know, if you consider one of these options, because neither one of us know, you know, the exact answer to that question, but we can guess at possibilities, right? And it's either you switch places, or you're both in there at the same time, or maybe you do merge, and maybe the convergence point where you merge feels like an enlightenment. Okay, now I had an experience in December of '79 where I woke up one morning and everything was different. I was looking around like, okay. And the first thing I did was I looked at my hands, and I thought, these are not my hands. And I'm going around the house, and I'm recognizing, you know, my sisters, my mom, and my dad. But it was, in a way, it was, I recognized everyone there, but it was like, honestly, that I was there for the first time. And so if, let's say, another me jumped from a different timeline into this one, I was 16 at the time, into my 16-year-old self here, and whatever that other me brought merged with the me that was already present in this body. And, you know, you add up all the sum of the parts, and I woke up that morning, and yes, I was enlightened in some way. I was different because the other me, even though he recognized the members of the family in the house and everything, he had seen it from the other dimension. Okay, now he was seeing it in this dimension. Because after I looked at my hands, I touched the wall and was looking at the texture of the wall, you know. And remember, I was a nerdy kid. I didn't drink or do drugs or anything. I never ingested THC till I'd been diagnosed with cancer in 2020, and you know, started taking gummies, you know, to help with that. So it wasn't a trip. It wasn't a hangover. It was, woke up and it was weird stuff going on. And so that could have been another me, okay, from a different timeline. Okay, in the past, I've wondered if it was me from my own future jumping back into my 16-year-old self. But with this multiple timeline, it could be me, an older me, for example, who jumped into a younger me in this timeline. So it's still me, but it's an enhanced me because it's me and another me.
Do you think that it's possible that what we're seeing as the Mandela effect could just be a reflection of bleeding through these different dimensions and timelines?
Yeah, could be. It could be people having made the jumps from different timelines and not consciously realizing that that's what's happened to them, that that's what they've done. But it could also, it could be all of this, by the way, but it could also be in the mix. Could be some shenanigans with technology. You know, there's that whole issue with CERN and Collider and things like that.
Yes.
You know.
Well, I did want to get your thoughts on how advanced you think our black sector military technology is compared to what we know about. I know that you've written about portals many times. I recently spent some time at Space Wolf Research Center right next to Skinwalker Ranch, and the amount of interest in that land from aerospace companies and billionaires is incredible. So there is something very interesting going on there, and these high-level interests, military interests, Pentagon, aerospace companies, they are very aware that there is something that they can harness there, probably weaponize. And I'd like your thoughts on that, especially when it comes to possibility. I've heard that some of these entities out there at Skinwalker Ranch have even successfully opened portals. Things have come through. So very interesting things unfolding there. But the fact that there is such interest from such high-level corporate entities and military tells me that there's something to all that.
Yeah, well, the technology part, like how far is our technology? Well, I think it's easy to say too that that the technology's advanced enough that something that they were testing off of the coast of California in 2004 to this day has a bunch of people convinced that it was some otherworldly thing. Okay, that's an example of how advanced some of our technology is. Yeah. But as far as Skinwalker Ranch, again, you got to do the due diligence on thinking about all this stuff. It could be that what they're interested in that area, okay, is not what the wild stories are. It could be that those wild stories are just that, wild stories, and they're allowed to be perpetuated because it helps cover what the real technological interest is. Okay, it could be something that scientifically is fascinating, and even for the layman, would be like, oh, that's cool, but it could also be that all that stuff about the big giant dire wolf coming through the portal and all this stuff, that could just be nonsense that was a byproduct of an original crazy cover story. Could be. You have to consider that possibility. I personally, I think they already crossed a line of, okay, hard to believe what's coming out of there, because, by the time you get to the point where it's made into a reality show the way it's been made into, and other ways that it's been expressed, then you're unfortunately getting into the territory where now it's difficult to know what are the legitimate accounts and what are the ones that are just the products of entertainment. And so what I fall back on is, I would love to see the actual government file on the property, the actual bona fide classified file that's on the property, because that's where you would get the real stuff to pay attention to. It's like Indrid Cold with the Woody Dernberger Mothman. Okay, let me tell you something. The legitimate Indrid Cold stuff to pay attention to is limited. It's what Woody Dernberger first reported. Okay, all that stuff afterwards about Indrid Cold, the crazy smiling man, and he appeared in New Jersey, and he was this, or some people said it was a gang affiliate, and all this crazy stuff, particularly the stuff of the last 10, 20 years. This is all, most of it's nonsense. Okay, what they're doing is it's on the level of the creepypasta stuff. Okay, you have to go back to the source material, and that's what I'm saying about, unfortunately, about Skinwalker Ranch. You can't go on what George Knapp or somebody, I think he wrote a book that involved, I could be wrong, but you can't go on the books written by folks like in the UFO paranormal community.
Well, for me, the most interesting thing out there was talking to the locals and the natives and the people who've had firsthand experiences, and throw away all these stories you hear from these big entities. I was talking to the people who have witnessed things personally, and some of their stories were absolutely fascinating.
There you go. Yeah. You get on the ground, right, and you go talk to these people that have lived there, but ultimately, as far as talking about the interest in the aerospace companies and stuff, that's what I was referring to. I would want to see. And, obviously I've been outside. We're all here, as far as we know, outside that community. So we don't have access to that. And in that would clarify why the aerospace and other technology and other such companies are involved. And it doesn't mean that it's not, I'm not saying that it's not extraordinary. What I'm saying is to be selective and use discernment in which accounts you're going to, really consider, because ever since it got in the domain of entertainment, well, a lot of crap gets put out there. Got to be careful.
100%. Now, last half of the show, I want to tie back this year's election to time travel and predictive programming. And I know you wrote about Ingersoll Lockwood and the last president and all the strange connections between these stories. For those that may not be familiar, give us an overview of Ingersoll Lockwood and some of the stories that he wrote.
Well, it's very simple. Ingersoll Lockwood in the 1890s wrote some stories, 2 books about a boy, a young kid who travels to fantastic places and has fantastic adventures. Okay, similar to Alice in Wonderland, Gulliver's Travels, you name it. And he happens to have a title of Baron. Okay, like there's a duke, there's a prince, there's Baron, right? And his last name happens to be Trump, Baron Trump. And this book was published in 1893. It was the 1890s. And they were illustrated by a guy named Charles Howard Johnson, who I also talk a lot about in my time travel book. And Charles Howard Johnson's illustration of the character Baron Trump, the little boy in the stories, well, bears an uncanny resemblance, almost exact. Yeah. And there is one picture that is exact to Donald Trump's son, Baron Trump, Baron with 2 R's in the case of Donald Trump's son, at the age he was and exactly how he looked in 2015 when Trump announced that he was running, when his son Baron was still a little boy. Okay. And so that prompted people to go, oh, look at this. The kid's name is Baron Trump and he looks just like him. What's going on here? And there's other little things in the story. Well, Lockwood also wrote a novella. It's not a full book, titled 1900 or the Last President, which in a nutshell, when you read it, it's essentially saying what has happened to the United States in the last 4 years since Biden was president. Okay. And there's some synchronicities pointing to Trump in the background, and things going on with all the dissension and the division in the country and stuff. And it ends with a terrorist act, a bomb detonated in the Capitol building, I think on or around Election Day. And, a lot of people have looked at that and wondered, well, what is that predicting? Because it already looks like it's seen the 4 years of the Biden presidency. And what's this with, young Baron Trump and the what's going on here? And these books were written in the 1890s and essentially lost to history, forgotten about, until Trump runs for president in 2015 and gets elected, and somebody notices, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here with this? So I, took a look at it, and, I have my 2 cents about it out there. But what I suggest is that either Ingersoll Lockwood himself or his illustrator, Charles Howard Johnson, used some means of looking into the future, okay? Whether it's scrying, using a reflective surface and kind of getting your mind into a particular alpha zone, or using what we would call today remote viewing, a form of remote viewing. And doing it that way, you're looking through the murk of time, right? You're going to see things in a way that may not be 100% clear. So what you might get is a flash of a face, a name. You hear a name being mentioned. Oh, Baron Trump, and a little flash of a face. And so in trying to present an interpretation of this murky vision you've had of the future, you end up writing a story that is not going to get everything right, but it's going to have those hints, those resonances with the future, like the character's name, like the illustration of how he looks. Yeah. See, that's one possibility. The other possibility that I consider and that I've discussed in both with Todd Wood in the Mystery of Ingersoll Lockwood book, and in my time travel guidebook, the possibility of Charles Howard Johnson having been a time traveler. And he came from our times, fully aware of Trump and Barron Trump and all this stuff, and went back to the 1800s, right? And told Lockwood, a bit about stuff in the future. And Lockwood, for whatever reason, chose to reflect this knowledge in this children's story and this, a much more, I fear, prescient story, The Last President.
Yes. And I just enjoy how aware I've become that our reality is much stranger than most would admit, especially the synchromistic aspects that connect everything. It's really amazing. Now, final thoughts. With everything we've discussed today, especially during the first half of the show, with what's been unfolding, I think it's just like I just said. I think that things have always been this way. We're becoming more aware that there's some corruption and some fundamental problems with our ruling class. But with everything that's happened, I wonder if we are going to a better place collectively than we were from being unaware. That if this is all really a good thing that's unfolded since 2020, we are seeing sort of this mass awakening. Or is it that we're kind of stuck in these echo chambers because of technology and social media, to where we think a lot of people are waking up, but we're just being bounced back to each other, and the only people that we're being shown that are interested in some of these things, just based on what the algorithms are feeding them with social media and things like that. So I wonder if it's just an echo chamber, or if we're having this really massive awakening right now.
It's both. First of all, anytime, nefarious players, tyrants are exposed, that's always a good thing. No matter what you have to go through to overcome them, that's always a good thing. Always good to overcome tyrants. But there is also a lot of echo chamber stuff going on at the same time. See, that's the thing. So many people want to say it's got to be this one thing. No, it can't be that. It's got to be this model over here. No, it's multiple models going on, folks. It's multiple. There are people who have figured it out. There's even more people who don't know crap about what they're talking about, and they think they've got it figured out. Unfortunately, those people sometimes get the louder voices, the bigger megaphone, and they can lead, people in the wrong direction, and they think they're right. But there are people who have figured it out. Maybe, and I would say a lot of them don't talk. They don't talk about it. Not everybody wants to be famous. Not everybody wants to be the guy who knows. We have way too much of that in our community. I think sometimes our little world of UFOs, conspiracy and paranormal stuff, alternative research, rather than just focusing on what is the possible truth, what are the possibilities, but I do think that all these things that you're talking about are going on. There are things that aren't what people are building them up to be. There are things that are what people are concerned that they are. Okay. There are people that are pulling strings to do bad things to us, to manipulate us and control us. But it's not always in the places people think it is, and it's not always exactly the way they think it is. You know what I'm saying? So you have to be open to all possibilities and aware of all possibilities out there, okay? But you can't let yourself get so paranoid that you're unable to function, that you're unable to maneuver when you have to. So, that would be my best advice for getting through these times. And also, I was listening to Tino Struckman and Joseph Farrell talking the other day, and Joseph said something interesting. There's knowing what you're willing to kill for, but you also got to know what you're willing to die for. And that's, in our times, that's part of the equation, is knowing where that line is.
Yeah, this is
because
go ahead.
We're going to face one of those politically tumultuous times. There's a lot of people that talk about this like they like it. We've got too many people that have grown up on dystopian movies and literature and TV and stuff, and they have this romantic view of what that would be like. Same with people that want civil war, that kind of thing. Well, I'll tell you what, a lot of those people, the first time they have their, as depicted in Saving Private Ryan, their realistic experience of, the D-Day beach, they're not going to think it's so romantic anymore when they see what it really entails. And my point is, sometimes those fights have to be done, but just really know what you're getting into. And it might be that, some desperate action is the only way we can stop the tyrants, but we'll just have to see.
Yeah. We are in very fascinating times. Walter, thank you so much. This was great information. Before you go, for those that want to find out more about you and pick up some books, what's the best way for them to do so?
Go to walterbosley.com. All my books are there, including the new one, Time Travel Guidebook, which you guys might find real interesting. And it's you can have fun with it, or you can try it, But walterbosley.com is the place, and I have a live stream every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Come check it out at the Walter Bosley channel at YouTube.
Perfect. Walter, thank you so much. We'll definitely be doing this again in the future. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. We'll see y'all then.